not too happy with that. Okay, so this lecture is shorter a bit than the previous one on embryology. I think it also will cover some things we already saw in embryology lecture, so that had to go kind of quickly through because it was not the main focus in the embryology lecture. So let's get started. So basically, the background to this problem that we're going to talk about today is that children must develop several skills as they get older. So as you start in life, you do some tasks, but they are pretty repetitive usually, and they are quite simple when we look back, I guess. And they want to function more in response to the environment and communicate their needs. So it's more of a circular type of reaction that you see. And as they get older, they learn to solve problems. They do that through brain development, I guess, that increase their computer capacity, and also through their interaction with the environment, they make new paradigm that allows them to think differently. And it gets more and more abstract as you get older. In other words, you will solve the problem in your brain before you actually execute the problem. You won't just do trial and error. So that kind of accumulates into solving very, very complex problems that relate to things we'll never see, maybe physics and very complicated things like that. So the brain changes and as you get older, and that's kind of the failure of doing so that relates to the disease we're going to talk about today. So what we're going to talk about today is called intellectual disability. You may not know what intellectual disability is, but you may have heard about mental retardation. So mental retardation is a term we used to use, I guess, and we still use in the research field mostly, that refers to that kind of disease. Since in 2002, the American Academy has suggested we use the term intellectual disability because the term mental retardation was thought to be associated with other, social stigmata and things like that, so that the family would not benefit always from that. So for our purpose today, we will think that those two things are pretty much the same. From a neuropsychology point of view, you would say it's not exactly the same, but for our purpose, we'll equate that to mental retardation. What is it? Well, it's a group of disorders, and I stress this because as you said in Lonnie's talk last week, Tuesday, which I missed part of it, but from the get-go, he told you that this was an heterogeneous disorder. In other words, when you're labeled with autism, it's not all the kids with autism that are exactly the same. And that's the same for intellectual disability. Actually, most of the kids are different, and the reason why they got intellectual disability. It's a group of disorders, therefore, where children fail to develop normal cognitive skills. And Ronnie was talking about social orienting, as the main feature of autism. In our case, we're not talking so much about social orienting, we're talking about the other function, such as language, which can also be affected in autism, but also functioning in the activity of daily living, learning memory, and other factors which we'll come to talk about afterwards. There's different causes for intellectual disability. It's actually a very strong region of research right now to try to find out why these kids have learning disability or intellectual disability. Because for a long time we didn't know much about why they got that. We could describe what was wrong with them, but we could not pin why. We found out, and we meaning all the clinician and basic science researchers working on that, there's a lot of kids where it's a genetic problem. And I'll come back to what is that and how we investigate that. In some cases, it's an environmental factor. You can have toxin in the environment, you can have exposure to X-ray, or exposure to radiation, exposure to some chemicals that will damage the brain and lead the brain to have difficulty learning things or developing normal language, normal intelligence. As I said, some drugs can do that. In utero use of alcohol, for instance, by the mother, can lead to fetal alcohol syndrome. Patients with fetal alcohol syndrome will have learning disability, for instance, and mental retardation or intellectual disability sometimes, depending on the degree of severity. So this and all the other drugs can lead to that problem. So anything cocaine or any could do that too. And then there's some of them that will have brain malformation, which kind of makes a nice link to the past lecture that I gave you with the embryological problems. So the kids with dyssencephaly, the kids with polyposencephaly, they will have learning disability or more severe forms of it, which is intellectual disability, basically, or mental retardation. So in this case, we could find that with an MRI. In this case, we cannot, in the case of genetic problems. So it can be inherited or sporadic. What I mean by that is that when we talk to people and say the kid has only a genetic problem, they think you must be wrong because I'm fine and my wife is fine and our family is fine. So genetic does not mean inherited. I don't know, maybe easier for you guys to grasp this because you're raised in the age of DNA and stuff. But the idea is that a disease can be coded in the DNA, but may be spontaneously present in a patient. So in other words, the patient may be the first case of this disease. And that's what we mean by sporadic. That's really important because for long term, and it's the same, I don't know if you want to talk to that, but in autism research for a long time, they tried to find out what's the gene for this and that. And all they had to go with was the patient that had a family history. So if I had a twin brother with this, or if I had an uncle with that, or a brother, or something in my family, then we could look at what was similar in our DNA. But most patients are not like that. Most patients is just one patient in the family, so we cannot use these kind of techniques. So that's why I'll talk to techniques we use now to investigate these things. And this is brand new type of stuff. This is less than 5 years old, I would say, that we started doing these. So the talk today is different from the talk last year, and I'll probably have to change it again next year because this is evolving really fast. So intellectual disability is common. It's 3% of the population. So it's as common as epilepsy. We'll have to talk about epilepsy, and the doctors will talk about how many drugs we have to treat epilepsy and so on and so forth. In ID, we have no drugs, nothing whatsoever. All we can do is do speech-language pathology, physiotherapy, or traditional therapy, which works really well, but does not give us, perfect results either. So it's a common disorder. 3% in our book is very common. Okay, so it's not a rare disorder. It leads to cost of, I didn't find a Canadian study, but in the US they estimate $13 billion each year. And this is to educate the kids and to have special services. Some of the health care is compounded in this, but most of it is not. So it's a lot of money. And there's some estimates, and this is not in the slide, so it's not an exact question whatsoever, but there's about $1 million that you will spend for a kid that has intellectual disability, at least $1 million in their lifespan. So the problem with ID is that it's diagnosed between the age of 3 and 9, when the kid starts having problems compared to his peers. He's not learning to talk, he's not able to process information as the other kids as well. And that's when they start going to daycare or to kindergarten or something like that. And then they have to see us, they have to see a psychologist, they have to see a psychiatrist sometimes, they have to see a pediatrician, developmental pediatrician like Dr. Zungenbaum that we saw on Tuesday. And then we run a lot of tests and we figure out if there's a problem. So it's not diagnosed at birth, and it's not diagnosed before birth. So that's a big problem because it's hard to, you kind of have to go back and try to fix something that's not developing properly. It affects the patient for life. At this point, we do not have a treatment that I can give a pill to a patient and then cure him from the disease. So it's basically a situation where you do a lot of help, through, like I said, self-T and physio and OT, but you do not have a treatment. Now this will change probably in your lifespan and in my lifespan, I'm sure as well, because the amount of information we're learning about the brain and how it leads to these kind of mental retardation problems is just like fantastic. And the amount of people that are working on finding drugs to treat these things is huge. And the amount of money that's put into this is enormous. And so this will come to an end at a treatment as well. Are we going to be able to treat all the kids with this? That's another question. But for some of the most common diseases, like I'm going to talk about today, there's treatment already in the pipeline. And I'll show you our research actually, and other people's research on some diseases that actually changed the way we think about these diseases. So the plan for today is basically the same idea as the last time, is we're going to review the tools first. Okay, so here's giving you an overview. So I'm going to tell you about the tools that are appropriate for this type of problem. Then I'm going to review the main causes. So there's, like I said, a huge amount of causes that we learn about in the everyday actually in the clinic. I'm not going to talk about all of them. I'm going to talk about the most common one. And then I'm going to go very quickly through some research model that people have used. so that you can think about how yourself, how you would relate science to this problem. So the tools we use are pretty much similar to the one, and you can see that on the slide that we talked about in the molecular embryology. But there's a few differences. First one is that we assess patients in the clinic based on their development. And that's pretty simple if you think about it. You have a child and you're supposed to do some step at certain age. You're supposed to walk at 1 year, you're supposed to say first words at 1 year, so on and so forth. So we have milestones that we use by the end of the 7 months, by the end of the first year, a year and a half, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. And you do not need to memorize this. This is for us in the clinic. We need to know those things because we need to ask mom and dad, can you do this, can you do that, can you do this, can you do that? And we start with the age of the child, then we go backwards. And that's something you may have heard this kid has the mental age of a 3-year-old and he's 5 or 6. So that's kind of a rough estimate that people will make an assumption, an assessment of in the clinic by going through those very simple tasks, and you put cubes together, that kind of thing. So it's very, very basic, but it's actually very telling of what's the performance of the child. And we'll assess different fields. We'll assess language, social interaction. We'll assess also how it can function in daily living activities, like doing buttons, zippers, and things like that. And so that's very crude, but it's usually pretty accurate in terms of knowing where the kid is at. So this is basically me sitting with the patient and the mother and the father and just asking those questions or doing those tasks or observing the kid doing these tasks. And so there's a lot of scales that have been developed to monitor the development of children. This is from the NIH or the CDC, but there is some from Denver, and there's different, those of you who do psychology will know a ton of those that have been developed. This is a video I like to show because this is a normal child actually, and she's shown this thing, and she's asked to copy it. So I guess, I hope you can tell this is not the same as that. I worked late last night, sorry guys, if I make weird sentences or if I look bizarre, I was in the emergency room a bit too late for my age. So the old guy speaking is actually Piaget, which is one of the psychologists I admire the most. And what he did is he just took normal kids and he said, what did they do at this age? What did they do at this age? And what we discovered actually is that it's not like we thought that you knew like fine, but this triangle would be kind of blurry. Is that she didn't do a triangle at all, and so you can see she did a square, and then she put like little point, which is like edges, I guess, around it. So she got the feeling that this kid is not mentally retarded or has any intellectual disability or problems like that. She's a normal child, but she's younger than the age where she should be able to do that. So the triangle is usually a 5-year-old milestone. And she's 3.5, I think. So she's able to do a square, which is a 4-year-old milestone, as opposed to a circle, which is a 3-year-old. So this kid is actually advanced. But she, conceptually, we don't know what's happening, but that's what my research is about. All the people working on that is trying to figure out what's going on in there that she cannot copy this, because you think it's pretty straightforward. So that was Piaget's big thing, is actually going back to experimental data, back to Piaget's actual, like opening up the skull, looking at the brain, instead of just making theories about it. So that's what this guy did. I was going to say, I don't have music. So basically, the triangle is a later stage. So I don't have a video, and I should have, but I don't have a video of a kid with intellectual disability. But if you have a kid with intellectual disability, the kid could be, or she could be, 9-year-old, for instance, and she would do that kind of thing. So she would be past the age where she should do the triangle, but she won't be able to do triangle. So she'll draw me a square, or you'll draw me a square or a circle, and then you'll put things around it, but it won't be a square, a triangle. So that's the idea that you construct progressively the skills to do some tasks, and that's one example of that. In a normal patient in this case, but that's the kind of thing you would see in a patient with intellectual disabilities, right? So after I've done my basic, very crude assessment in the clinic, I kind of known that, and usually that's not me, it's the pediatrician who has already found out, or it comes from the doctor or the parents, and the parents usually. We send the kids for the psychometric testing. And this is done in collaboration with neuropsychologists usually. So I just want to touch base on that because that's quite interesting. The psychometric approach is the idea that you can dissect the skills of a kid by doing simple tests. So you'll hear that my IQ is I don't know what Sheldon's IQ is in the Big Bang Theory, 200 or something. a friend of mine in New York was like going to a restaurant. He's like, let my friend go first. He has an IQ of this and that. So it's not going to work here. But anyway, IQ is a measure that is intellectual quotient. So I should write that down completely. But the idea is that it's a comparison for people your age. So if you're the same as people your age, it's 100. Okay. And if you're higher than the average, that would be 150 or whatever. And if you're lower, that's going to be below 100. That's how it means. And you'll need to write it down. I have a slide on that later. But this is just like a number that we get, and that's a number that we'll have in our clinic when we see a patient after he's getting to know psychology. But what it assesses actually is multiple aspects of intellectual function. I mean, I always try to make a summary slide on what intelligence, and then everyone's able to make it. Now, if somebody has a slide on what's intelligence, just send it to me. But the idea is that it has multiple components. One of them is ability to reason, solve problems, think abstractly, plan, think, and learn from experience. So not to repeat always the same mistakes. All these things will be tested through various types of psychological testing in the clinic by the neuropsychologists with the trial. And then will be kind of computed and give you a number. Now the IQ the idea of doing tests like that was developed by this guy, and he didn't actually work with charcoal, which you have seen Pierre talk about, which is one of the founding fathers in neurology. What these guys were trying to do is that instead of having open focus, I think this is that, they were trying to do real tests for the patient. So that's what this guy did. He developed a testing method where he could assess multiple mental functions and the goal at that time was to develop a test that would tell the child should go to grade 1, grade 2, or be longer in grade 1, so on and so forth. And at that time, they didn't call that the IQ, they called that the mental age. So if you read old books, or if you hear about maybe other people, they will say, oh, my child has a mental age of this. This is where it's coming from. These kind of tests were devised back then to try to put an equivalent so that you would not, if you have a mental age of 10, you would not go in a class with a mental age of 5, for instance, and because the kids will not process information the same way. You know, this girl, she's in the video, she's pretty bright, but even if I try to make it be a triangle, it's not going to work. So what Piaget showed is you could push people and they could learn things faster, but it will kind of plateau at some point. It's not like an infinite thing you can do. So Binet is a psychologist that developed those tests. And we still use modified version of it, so the Stanford Binet, Stanford University and Binet. And there's a variety of tests that will test more specific things. So it's not like a battery that goes to everybody. The neuropsychologist is able to then, if she finds or he finds a deficit in some problem, we'll send more tests targeting this, and we'll just open up this possibility. So, component of the IQ test there's two parts to it. The first one is the verbal part, and that will be vocabulary, and it's more related to your education. It's also very much related to your background. So if you're from a certain country versus another country. And then there's the non-verbal thing, and this is more what you see online when you go to an IQ test on the internet. You know, there's like these shapes, you need to recognize that there's a series of things, you need to know what's the next thing coming. Those are more visuospatial and non-verbal. So you could think this refers more to the left hemisphere because that's the verbal hemisphere, and the non-verbal more to the right hemisphere. But in the clinic, it's hard many times to pin this down like that. But if somebody has a stroke, for instance, on the right hemisphere, these are the scales that we'll see more in care. So this is just a graph talking about the IQ, and it should be normally distributed in the population. And what you see is that the average is 100. So no standard deviation from the mean is 100 here. And as you get lower, as you deviate from that, you get either lower or higher IQ. So IQ is relative children of the same age. That's important because if you're doing the same test to a 5-year-old and the same test to a 10-year-old, they're not going to score the same way on this. So we actually now, this is back, this thing back is maybe a bit older, but now we have more tests that we can have for each age. So even like a 1 or 2-year-old, you can do some tests which are more motor tests type of thing. They're not as much based on language because they don't have language so much at this age. But there's tests for every age now. So when we talk about mental retardation or intellectual disability, it's usually the cutoff line is around 70. So a patient that scores less than 70 on this composite IQ will have mild if it's up to 50 to 70. If it's below 40, then it's moderate. And then below that, severe. You don't need to remember those numbers, but it's just to give you an idea there's a grading system. So it's not everybody that has mental retardation that is the same. I have some kids where they can do some tasks pretty well. I have some kids where they can just sit there and they cannot do any tasks. They cannot say any word, they cannot do any interaction with us. So there's severity in this. And that's quite important because the more profound this is, the more severe this is, it changes a bit what you're going to find as the reason for this problem. So as I've already kind of hinted, a multidisciplinary team assessment is a big part of having an assessment of a kid today. So it's not me walking in there and saying this kid has intellectual disability. It's a team. So I did like for the autism program, there's an autism clinic, and Dr. Zunga-Long, I didn't point this out, but he's the director of the clinic here in Edmonton. Basically, he's not working only by himself. He has a team of people working with him that will make sure that things fit together. And sometimes he calls me and he's like, this kid has a label of autism, but it just doesn't fit. You know, there's this and that. What do you think about that? And then that's when we'll find out that there's something else going on. There's a disease of the brain, there's an epilepsy, there's something else that's giving us a picture that's not the usual picture. So this type of multidimensional assessment is very important. And it's kind of based on the multiple intelligence approach, which is to say that it's not just one thing. Intelligence is multiple things. I'll come back to that. It includes a physiotherapist, occupational therapist. You'll say, why the physio and the OT? Well, because there are some tasks at some age that they cannot do verbally, they'll do motor-wise, so that's going to be important. The psychologist and the social services. There's other physicians also that we work with. There's a pediatrist, which have more to do with the physical medicine of the child. So is the child, for instance, affected also with cerebral palsy and other conditions? Is there a motor problem that we would need to know? Is the kid depressed? You know, so the psychiatrist will help us. Is the kid super anxious? You know, that's one big theme I've learned in the field of intellectual disabilities, that there's a huge amount of anxiety. So by treating anxiety, sometimes you'll see the performance of the kid actually improve quite a bit. And it's impressive how much there is exactly related to, especially some of the patients. Geneticists, because as I kind of pointed out already, there's a lot of that condition that's associated with gene problems. So the multiple intelligence theory basically just, I think, put on paper the idea that it's not everybody's intelligence is the same. So some people will be very good at spatial navigation, visual-spatial tasks. For instance, your surgeon, orthopedic surgeon, needs to know how the bone goes to this and that, because when he's in the OR, if he has no idea what's the 3D of that, then it's going to end up with a leg backward, I guess, in the OR. But I may be very terrible at that. I may be good at linguistic or logical processing. I'm terrible at musical and worse at interpersonal. Intrapersonal, I'm not too sure what this is about. But the idea is that you've got multiple facets or multiple types of intelligence. And that's really important because that's a big problem when family goes to us and we say the kid has mental retardation or intellectual disability. They'll think that the kid is bad, you know, altogether. And we need to reinforce and stress the idea that it's not, you know, because he cannot do this that he won't be able to do that. And the reverse is true also. Sometimes we'll say, oh, but he's fantastic at music, so you cannot be having intellectual disability. And that's not always true either. These things kind of develop, probably because they have different circuits in the brain, develop not in parallel. So it's not a one thing, you know, score. So we simplify or not with the IQ. And I think that's partly because we want the school and the school system and the doctors to be able to work on something. But in the real life, it's way more complicated than that. Okay, so this is an MRI machine. And you've seen that before. It's changed the world of medicine, at least of neurology. Neuroimaging can be performed on living people, and I've talked about that before. it gives us an opportunity to diagnose things before the patient pass away, and that's huge. It also tells us if patient changes. So I had a patient just yesterday that was not performing as usual, had a lot of seizure, and we were making sure that the brain had not developed something else. And so that's why we'll roll the patient into the MRI and make sure that's evolving or not. And then sometimes we'll find, oh, there's liquid accumulation in the brain, something like that. So that's why patients get worse. So the MRI allows you this kind of high resolution imaging. And what you'll see is that this is normal brain, basically. You've seen that slide before in the other lecture, but is that this is a very, very fine, almost like a pathology examination of the brain. And that's very important, because the problem you're dealing with a patient with intellectual disability is not the same as a patient with malformation. Most of the time, they're not missing half of the brain, or there's not like half of the brain that is way too big. Most of my patients don't have that. They have small things, like a small malformation here or there that we will not pick up if we did not do a fine examination. They may have part of this, which is the cerebellum, that will be just smaller. And in autism, actually, it's coming to be more and more understood that there's actually some patient that just have a different size of these organs. So those parts, of the brain. So it's very important to be able to be accurate in measurement and also have a fine picture. Otherwise, you won't be able to take the measurement. So, and again, there's different views. So this group in Montreal actually did a study that looked at imaging anomalies in intellectual disability. And they were quite common, actually. Now, the population was this patient coming to the clinic. I think those numbers are higher than what we've seen here. Maybe because the referral base is different, I'm not sure. But it just pointed out that you need to do an MRI basically when the patient has intellectual disability, because in about 50% of the case, you'll find something wrong with the brain. So it's not like most patients have nothing in the brain, there's something. And there's a long list of names which you don't need to remember. But just to say that you may, I think I don't know, say that I'm the topic, yeah, and the letters on. So immediate incision, you've seen that last time on the embryology lecture. We've talked about atrophy or bigger brain. We didn't maybe go through all of those, but basically there's all sorts of disease that are related to the development of the brain that can be seen in each patient and lead to the intellectual disability. The yield of a CAT scan or CT scan is not as high, and so that's why studies done back before the 1990s didn't have such a high yield. But the studies that are done more recently show that the MRI is really important. So in intellectual disability, and we'll just take a break here, this is kind of important to remember that. So there's two types of patients basically that we see. There's the patient where we see something wrong on the MRI, and there's a patient where we don't see something wrong on the MRI. So this is kind of an easy classification you think about. And so what you can see wrong with the MRI, that's a lot of stuff that we will talk about with the patient. But there's a big group, about 50% of people that do not have anything visible on MRI. And that's the puzzling part, and I find this is the exciting part, is that parents will say, why is this that the kid cannot read or talk and do stuff if the MRI is fine? And so that's where the science kicks in, is that it has to do with something that's not visible in the MRI. So it's either the neural connection, or the way those neurons work. So the genes that are within them, all the iron and neurotransmitter and all that stuff. So the other thing we do more and more and more and more is we can analyze the patient DNA. So I think this is the same slide, but I put a bit more text. This is Watson and Crick, and basically what they did is they described the structure of DNA. This is huge because now we can do that every day. We can sequence is the gene this, that, fine or not. DNA is a double helix, also made of bases, ACTG, which are those, you'll see those each basically layer on this. And, well, you can see it better here, like each line, I guess, would be one base, and then the corresponding matching. So it's like a zipper, you have like a matching of pair between the two. And that's an important thing for your body uses that, but we'll hijack that and do tests that use that kind of complementarity, or Watson Crick based here. And each side of the helix, like I said, is paired to a complementary side. So you'll see in the test that we do that we kind of reuse this idea to perform the test. So you've seen this picture before. The gene is a mixture of exon and introns, and it's compacted. The DNA is then compacted a lot into what will form the chromosome. So up to not so long ago, actually, up to I would say the 2000s, we used to do that as the karyotype. So we would take the blood cells, send the leukocytes with gold cells, and then they would look at the DNA by staining it. So the black here that you see are gene cells, so it's a dye, basically that go and integrate into the DNA and will stain it. So, so like I said here, it's a staining method, and we look at the banding pattern on microscope. Really means there's still geneticist. So there's people that's their job, that's what they do. They just work in the lab, and they are physician or not, and will map, how the chromosomes are. They don't do just that anymore because there's way more tests now. But this is kind of the thing we did for a long time. And when we talk about bands, that's the lines that you can see. So this is a band, this is a band. And so for a long time, what we would do is just look at this and then count the bands and make sure there's no band missing. So there's a book in your picture. And we know that chromosome 16 points looks like this. And if somebody is missing a band, then we know, oh, there's a deletion. Or if somebody has, the black band repeated 2 times or 3 times, then we know there's a duplication. But as you can imagine, this is kind of hard, If you go back to that picture here, you're looking at bands on this, so imagine you don't see much of small changes. So the defects are diagnosed only based on the number of bands in this method. So people started thinking, can we do better than that? And business science people were doing that for a long time. They were doing what we call fish. What they did basically is they devised a way that the DNA when it replicates will kind of open up, and the double helix will kind of come apart. So it's like if you unzip, I won't do it, but it's like if you unzip your pants. Sometimes I do it in the clinic. Basically unzip the DNA. So what I can construct is I can make in the lab, an app side of the zipper, and I just put a collar on it, like a red or a blue tag. And it's a fluorescent tag. It could be a nuclear, a radioactive tag as well. What I'm going to do is open up the DNA, put into, so we do that in the lab, we don't do that on the patient. We take the patient's blood, open up his DNA, and then you'll just take a probe, basically, we call that a probe, which is my matching pair with the tag on it. And I'm just going to allow this to find this match on the patient's DNA. So if the patient doesn't have this part, then you try to match it, it's not going to match. So what you do is you do that, you incubate that at a certain temperature, and then you wash it. And then when you wash it, if it's not stuck to something, it'll just go away. And so when I try to do the gel after that, and I look, do I see this nuclear signal, or do I see this red color or blue color of fluorescence? And I don't see it, and means the patient doesn't have that. So I say patient, but it's used in every lab, or most of the lab in this university. So it's very common test. It's called hybridization. So you basically combine things. So people one day thought, oh, we should do that for the patient to see if there's pieces missing. I don't have a slide on that because that's kind of a method that went away a bit now. We use this, the chip. And what this is the same thing, but doing 105 or 100, I think that's like almost 200,000 times in one thing like that. So instead of, if you do a project in the lab, well actually probably you won't do that anymore in the lab, but if you were to do a project like that in the lab 10 years ago, you do one probe at a time, and it takes you like 2 months to do that, and it's very long, and it's hard to do. So using a chip allows you to see more details, and the way it works is, this is from Google, so you can Google that, but it's like Legos, I guess. It kind of matches, you find this match. And what you're doing on the chip is you're doing this, but like, well, it depends. Each year they get more probe on the chip because you can make it small. But the idea is that you get to find if the patient has copies of that gene too. And you just then have a high-power camera and a computer that will read this thing and give you that signal that we talked about before. So we always do that by comparisons. So it's either patient versus sample versus reference, color-coded. And if you have too much of it in the patient, then it'll come out red instead of changing out. If it's too little, in other words, this guy has more of the reference, then it'll come out green. And so you can know if there's a deletion or a loss, or a duplication or a gain. So this is based, like I said, on the hybridization method. comparing the patient DNA to a reference DNA. And you'll say, oh, but what tells you that the reference is normal? Well, that's a big question in this field. We don't know that for sure. But it's kind of looked for that. And we are allowed to look for, that allows us to look for smaller deletion or duplication. Because now we're not looking at a very, very big band on the karyotype. We're looking at, a chunk, a little line of DNA, maybe 20, 40 base pairs, something like that, that we will add or not add in the patient. So we kind of bring it down to a smaller size of deletion or duplication that we can detect. You'll say a big deal. Well, it's actually a huge deal. With this, we capture at least 15, some people say even more, 20% of patients that we didn't have a diagnosis on carrier. So it's actually a big deal. Well, and 2 years ago, I think I gave this lecture. I put this is the future. I think which year was it? 2010. Yeah, 2010. Yeah, 2010. This was the future. And then I started doing this, and we got lots of funding to do that here. And we send those tests to the U.S. to the College of Medicine, and then people starting, all around the world doing that more, and now it's the gold standard. So some people now argue that the karyotype that I'm talking about, it's not going to be done anymore. People are going to go straight to that. So the University of Alberta is actually one of the first, I think, in Canada to get that equipment, and they're doing this test now here. So these kind of things move very quickly, and they're being applied to every single disease you can think of. Okay, so the last test we do, I guess, now as a research, is this, and that's kind of the now, actually. It's the sequencing of the DNA. So instead of just looking, is there a bit missing, we're going to start and look at what's this, what's that. So is it an ACTG or is it an APCG? We're going to look at the sequence of every single base pair. That will allow us to see if there's a piece missing, because then the thing will jump from a letter to another. But it also will tell us if it has switched, a letter for another letter, which can cause the protein not to be made or too much and so forth. So it allows us then to see a single base pair, not only deletion and duplication. So this is what you can hear about sequencing the genome, basically. And you'll say, oh, this is the future. Well, it's actually being done now as a research. It will, I think, be done for some disease, and we will actually, our group will start doing that. We just got a grant for that. So we'll get started doing that on our patients with intellectual disability that do not have a deletion, but that we have confidence that they may be a genetic problem for them, their MRI, their spine, and so on. So the idea is that these are the techniques, and they are very important. I cannot stress enough how much medicine depends on people inventing things. Otherwise we'd still be back in Sharper's days and looking at people, and I think this is where the problem is, and waiting for the brain to go to pathology. So the guys in the technology field this is what leads to some degree or facilitate the research and the discovery. Okay, so I'll just go now to some of the main causes, and then I'll give you some example of causes I found in my clinic in some patients using those genetic tests, and how these are kind of representative of what people are finding around the world. So the main causes of intellectual disability. So let's start with a case of a patient, which is obviously not a picture of my patient. It's a drawing from the internet. This would be a 12-month-old boy. He would come with decreased tone, which means that he would be kind of fluffy. He's not able to sit, despite being 12 months old. And he's not saying the first words like mom and dad. So this is the picture of the child. I don't know. Oh yeah, there you go. The next, after we've taken the story, we found that there's some developmental problems. We would examine the child and find and confirm that the tone is low, that the baby does not support itself as it should. And you would have what we call dysmorphic feature. That's a very important part of things. In some cases, we find that when we look at the child, they do not have the facial feature of their parents. Okay, they do not match the things you can see in their parents. Or sometimes they do, but that's another story. In this case, you'd see that the patient has a kind of a flat base of the nose here, and the eyes are kind of shaped this way instead of straight like that. If you look at the eyelid, and you can see that they have a single palm crease, and that there's an increased spacing between the toes. So you'll say, do you really look at that? Yes, we do. We actually have to get the baby naked and look at every single little piece and the baby and stuff like that. And it's very important because just by doing this examination, I can tell you what is the problem with the baby. I don't even need a genetic test. I will do it, but I don't even need it, to be suspicious. So anybody has ever seen a patient with this kind of situation or would like to venture a diagnosis or something like that?
Down syndrome?
Okay, yeah, you have Down syndrome. And that's this case, that would be my suspicion too in this patient. The reason I say suspicion and not certainty is because we're finding that sometimes some genes can look like other genes, and so it's very important to be careful about that. But I would say that's most likely what it is. And we would have sent a karyotype of this patient and found that there were 3 copies of chromosome 21. So usually you have 2 copies of each chromosome. So the karyotype, like I said, shows 2 copies of chromosome 21. And the reason I'm showing Down syndrome is because that's the most common cause for intellectual disability overall. So the diagnosis in this case would be confirmed by the karyotype, is only 21. And Down syndrome is still the most common cause of intellectual disability. If you take boys and girls combined together. It's caused by having 3 copies of the chromosome 21 and the genes that are in it. We don't know exactly which gene in the chromosome is important. It's probably multiple genes, but this is still a matter of active research. And not everybody with Down syndrome will be exactly the same. Actually, I see patients frequent, like almost every week, I would say, and they all have different features, and they all have somehow different problems. There are some common features, but there's also difference. And there's no treatment for Down syndrome in terms of gene therapy or medical drug treatment. And the reason I say that is because people will ask us all the time. So Down syndrome has the word down, which is the name of the guy that described it, but also has syndrome in it. And syndrome, just to give you what it is, because you'll see that a lot, is a common association of certain symptoms on history. So the patient has developed language poorly, has seizure. Okay, so that would be kind of one thing. And signs. So those were mentioned, the dysmorphic signs. So by inspecting the baby carefully, you can see that they have some features. For instance, the palmar crease, the upverted slanting of the eyes. By combining multiple signs together, then we can make association and say, oh, this is most likely what it is. We never call the syndrome just based on having one thing. So if you just have the palmar crease, you would not necessarily have Down syndrome. You need multiple signs usually to claim that. So Down syndrome is one example of genetic causes for mental retardation or intellectual disability. And if you look at the patient, this is a pie chart, just looking at the cause for severe intellectual disability. What you see is that most of them, 55%, is chromosomal and other genetic abnormalities. Now, this is an old graph actually from the 90s, so they used to put multiple congenital anomalies and specific syndrome. In other words, things that we know have those features, but we don't know what gene it is. So we're still kind of labeling it as congenital abnormalities. You can also have other causes though. The unknown is shrinking every year, but it's still there. There's still about 30% of patients, I would say more than this actually, where I don't find what's wrong, despite doing all the genetic tests. There's those other factors which used to be like labeled as autism without a non-cause. There's fetal deprivation or asphyxia, patient that lack oxygen before birth, during birth, or after birth. And then there's the babies that suffer from meningitis, encephalitis, or what we call central nervous system infection. And a big one is, fetal alcohol, and I don't see it here, but you would have to add that in the prenatal infection. I didn't mention that, but there's a gamut of infection, viruses and bacteria and parasites that mom can acquire during pregnancy that will damage the brain of the child and give them the problem, including intellectual disability. So basically, what we try to do is we try to match the problem with the developmental milestone to a certain gene. And that's very challenging because except for trisomy 21, where you can do a karyotype and see it, many times it's not at that level that you get at the level of chromosome. It's not the level of the DNA that you would find something else. But there are some factors for it. So one of them is this one. This patient, patient number 2, talked late, 3 years of age, and he presented with seizure as a teenager. He was also diagnosed with autism. Again, this is a picture I got from the internet, but this patient, this would be a picture representative of a patient with this condition. Anybody would venture anything that they find is different in the face of this patient, for instance, compared to another patient? Oh, somebody else. I heard something. I heard big ears, I think, but maybe not. So yeah, just hallucinating right now. Don't tell me if you did it. So big ears indeed, and so this is one of the features you'll find in this enormous called Fragile syndrome. Now there's also a large head. If you measure the head circumference of the patient, you'll find that it's larger than it should be compared to their parents. And there's other facial feature with the mouth. So basically, this is the most common cause of intellectual disability in males. So if you were to look at just males, that's the most common. And there's some discovery feature you'll find in the patient. It's always hard because depending on which you think background patient is and all that, those features may be harder for you to spot. But that's one of the things. These patients frequently will have, at least at some time in their life, some seizures or epilepsy, and that's a third of patients. They have memory problems as well, learning disability, and a big part of them will have some autism. They may not have a full-blown autism picture, but they will have some autistic traits at least. So Fragile syndrome is another one important to remember because that's the most common one in boys. The Fragile syndrome was an issue found in karyotype actually. People were growing the chromosome on a certain media that didn't have folate, and they found out that the chromosome here, X, would kind of shrink at the end of it. That's how they called it fragile. Fragile. She's kind of good. So this part would be kind of shrinking, and that's why we called it like that. So now there was a bunch of molecular biologists and geneticists that said, okay, that must be where the gene is. Let's find out what's going on. And so they took the patient and basically, having localized it to the X chromosome, then they could open up the chromosome and start looking at, okay, this part, is it okay? This part, is it okay? This part, is it okay? This was back in the, Peter, which year was that? 94, I think, or something like that? Before we had the genome sequence in the 2000s. So this was like, I don't know how many people's work for years, basically, to figure this out. And it was very, very difficult. But at least they had a region to work with, which is good. And what they found is that this is kind of a representation we use sometimes of the gene. It's just like a line, and we got different sections. Remember, you see exon here. Remember the diagram with exon, intron, stuff like that. I won't go into the details, but what they found with Fragile syndrome is that the gene was mutated. The Fragile X gene was mutated. And the way that it was mutated in most patients is that it had too much copies of a certain number of repeats of base pair CTG. So in a normal person, you would have 6 to 44, but they found that in the patients, they would actually have more than 100 copies of that repeat. So basically, they would have like, and we won't get into the details. If you want to know more about that, just email me and I'll send you more information. But the idea is that this kind of disease is not by missing the gene, it's because there's something in front of the gene that turns it off. It has to do with genetic control. And so we won't get more into the details of that, but just to say that these guys, if you sequence their gene, it's okay. But they got stuff that kind of repressed it from expressing itself. And so they end up having no Fragile X protein. And so it's like it's like it didn't have the gene in the first place. So this was quite interesting. And you'll remember from the embryology lecture that there's those spine and synapse. What they had found also is that those patients actually have, this is a normal patient, but so this would be a dendrite here, kind of a close-up of a dendrite. And this is the fine structure on the dendrite, which is called spine. They had abnormal spine. And they were kind of immature. So in the mature one, it looks more like this. And the Fragile X patient would have more of those long dendrites. So now they're starting making a connection that in Fragile X there's a gene, we know what it is. And now we're finding also when we look at the brain, or when we look at the mouse, Peter does that, look at the mouse model of Fragile X, for instance, we find that they don't have the normal spine. So Peter does actually, then he goes and look at how do you see the electricity going between cells when you have this versus when you have that. So knowing the gene is huge. Okay, parents will tell me, okay, so when we start the treatment, I'll say we don't have a treatment. But the way they did with Fragile X is that basically they found the gene, and then they started looking inside the brain, what's wrong with this, and not just looking within the scan, because the scan looks kind of okay, but looking at the cell tissue, and then found these things. Now you can zoom in and send all the basic science guys looking at that, and then figuring out what's going on. And I'll make a long story short, saying that we found actually that there was a significant problem there. Then there's a person in the lab at MIT who basically took a drug and put that drug and rescued that problem. Now you have a mouse model with that, and now we get that treatment for patients. So it's in experimental phases, but it's in the clinic in some centers in Canada and in the US. So it moved from, maybe in the last 8 years from being this to having a treatment in the clinic as a trial. So don't give up hope, I would say, because it is moving. Problem is that in most patients, we don't have this kind of pipeline yet. Because we don't have a known syndrome. Fragile X is the most common syndrome in boys. So in my clinic, I'll see that maybe not every week, but quite frequently. Other things that are related to other genes may not be as frequent. And so because of that, I may not have as much experience. So before we had the internet and all that, it was hard for me to know what Dr. So-and-so in Switzerland had the same patient as I had here. So this is a major problem. No known syndrome, no known common characteristic between the patients. The gene is causing the disorder is not known. So in Fragile X now it's easy. I just know what the gene is, or at least I can test for it. But if we don't know what the gene is for a condition, we cannot test for it. Also, sometimes we would not suspect the gene because the manifestations are different to those reported previously. What I mean by that is that nature is pretty bright, and the brain is very difficult to understand. So the gene sometimes will give you in a patient something, and in a different patient to give you something different, because they have a different genetic background. So they do not have the same gene as their neighbor or their friend, and because of that, they won't develop the disease the same way. So they may have the disease faster, sooner, later, that kind of thing. They may have the face affected, or the face may look completely normal, and so on and so forth. So it gets really tricky when you get to the clinical practice of that, because it's not as straightforward as always as in Fragile X. And even in Fragile X, we're discovering now that some patients do not have the full big ears, big head thing, It's not that straightforward for all. So the way we go around that when we don't know the gene, we don't know the syndrome, we are kind of lost there. We have used this technique which is called genome-wide approach, and using that chip. What we do with this is that it allows us to screen the known gene, the 25,000 known gene, using multiple probes. And so we're going to look for deletion mutation in the patient where we know there's intellectual disability, but we don't know why. So this is the case I wanted to talk about, which we've kind of talked about in the embryology actually already, which is patient number 3 in this actually. So this patient was referred to our clinic, like most patients with question of developmental delay of unknown etiology. So kid is not developing and we don't know why. We've done the MRI, we found the head was small, and that was inclusivity, and she had some seizures. So she had been treated by a neurologist for seizures, and so on and so forth. The seizures were okay, well controlled, but we didn't know why this was happening. Family wanted to push this further. Now that patient had developed those movements, and basically she would put her hands together like this, and kind of put them in cool and kind of not really strong, but just more like a repetitive movement. And you remember, when I say repetitive movement, maybe some of you just a light goes up and think about Lonnie's lecture where he talked about restricted repetitive movement. So this girl actually was thought to have autism. She's still thought to have that. But she was thought to have this syndrome in autism that's called Rett syndrome. The Rett syndrome is something also not that common, but it's very typical. So that's why I wanted to present it to you today. Patients with Rett syndrome have intellectual disability, and it's a common one with girls. So nowadays, actually, this test is performed in Calgary, so we do the blood test here and we ship it down to Calgary. And we do it more in many girls, I would say almost in most girls that have intellectual disabilities. And it's becoming more and more, and like any test we do more, we find more. Okay? And what we find is some patients that we did not think they had Rett syndrome. If I had not done the test, I probably would not have that, that we would have Rett syndrome. But there's some common features you'll see. For instance, they'll have apraxia. Apraxia means that you have the motor skills, you have the motor ability to do something, but you won't be able to perform the task. You may remember Peter's talk where the person had to reach for something or had to position it in a certain way. So these are forms of apraxia, basically you can see sometimes. These patients also have breathing problems. So their breathing is irregular. They'll kind of breathe and then stop breathing. And then they'll start again. And so you can imagine that's pretty frightening for the parents. And they'll be very unsteady or shaky kind of thing, and side to side. And the development will start normal for their head size, but then will kind of slow down and then go down. And the head will stop growing. Around the same time, they'll be unable to use their hands because their hands, all they're doing with it is putting it together on that, like nonstop. And the patient would be able before to go and grasp something from the mouth, and after that, all they'll lose is. So this is a very interesting disease, not for the patient, obviously, because that's still a disease we don't have a cure for. But if you think of it from a scientific point of view, it's a disease where the patient is really okay to start with and then starts having regression or loss of skills. And if you are interested in things like schizophrenia or other diseases like that, where patients are okay and then at some point start losing skills, that's very similar to that. I don't have time to talk about how exactly this gene is working, but it's caused by a very interesting gene called NACP2. And this gene actually regulates which gene will make RNA and so on and so forth. And it does that by just masking the DNA and blocking its ability to then be transcribed. So all you need to remember from that, I guess, is NACP2 regulates epigenetic control. So it's not changing the DNA sequence. What it's doing is that it's just changing the way the DNA is expressed. So I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but why is it that your eyes are different from your toes? Anybody has an eye on the toe? No. You can do that with a fly, actually. But the idea is that the DNA is all the same everywhere, but it's not expressed the same way everywhere. So if I look at the DNA from my brain, it should be the same as the DNA from my toes. But in my brain, certain genes are active, and my toes, certain genes are not active. And so the control of being active or not active is these type of proteins. And there's way more than that, but that's just like, just remember that NACP2 is part of that configuration. That's why the plants need to have a cold period before they flower and all those things. So it's not just human, it's up to the plants and the flies, everything has these kind of controls. Anyway, so in epigenetic, what we refer to it is not a change that not modify the sequence of DNA, but rather the control of expression of DNA. I'm just bringing this up here and I'm going quick through it, but if you open up Science or Nature, there's very good reviews on that every year. And these things are really, really what the research is about now in neurology and in psychiatry, in genetics. But anyway, the patient that had NACP2 testing was negative. So the doctors were like, oh, she has Rett syndrome, but she does not have NACP2 gene. So what's wrong here? So they started thinking about it, and then they sent us a patient, and we said, okay, maybe then there's another gene for that. And I'm playing this example here not because I want to show you that we found the gene, but more because using this thing, but more because that's a common problem that we will have. So in this patient, like I said, it started going down early on, as opposed to the first year only. And you've seen that in the previous lecture. And how to find this gene, we use this technique. And basically what we found is that this patient had a deletion. So if this would be the chromosome of the patient, there would be a chunk missing. And it's a small one. You see this band is there. If you looked at it on the microscope, that patient actually had that, a karyotype. It was normal. Because what you would see is that the black is there, and the black band would be there. But it's very, it's just a tiny bit smaller. So the microscope guys will not be able to appreciate that. But when we did the probe test, or the probe here, oh, nothing. So then they do a confirmation probe, and they say, oh no, there's something missing too. And in this case, the mom and the dad were fine. They did not miss this. It was just when the baby got made at some point in the stage from one cell to the brains, or the body's development, this part got missing. And we don't know why in this patient. But that deletion in this gene FOXP1, which I talked about the last time, is basically what caused something that looked like Rett syndrome. Now, since we've done that, there's been a lot of people doing this test, and I just wanted to provide you some things about the Fox-Human more detail. So Fox-Human basically promotes the proliferation of nerve cells, and that's all you need to remember. And when we don't have it, the brain doesn't grow normally, and that's like the case in our patients. You don't need to know about exactly what's going on. But like I said, since we published this case, people have actually started testing their patients with Rett syndrome that did not have any CP2, and they have found a lot of them. What they found is that the microcephaly is postnatal. The severe developmental delay, the kids will not develop language. Actually, most of them won't develop at all. And they will have dyskinesia, which is a type of movement disorder, which you'll hear more about when we talk about Parkinson's disease and things like that. And they have a malformation of their corpus callosum, which is this midline structure that communicates the two hemispheres together. So the idea of hypoplasia just means smaller. So we started with a patient which didn't have a syndrome really. Well, I guess we thought maybe Rett syndrome, and then we found the gene, and then that kind of spreads over the internet through papers and literature. And then people start doing this test, and then sure enough, you find a lot of your patients have that, and then we kind of establish a syndrome, or it's some kind of could come in the future together by having multiple patients. So it's very important to have multiple patients. It's very important also to have a test you can do on patients when you just have one patient. Otherwise, if I had waited for having a family of that in Edmonton, probably I would never have that. So the last, I think that's the last case, is a 13-year-old girl that came to global developmental delay, which included intellectual disability. She had difficulty also with visual contact, so Ronnie talked a bit about eye contact and kind of body language. And so that was kind of a trait that she had, but she did not have a full-blown autism diagnosis. And she was sensitive to noise, which is something we see in some of our patients. We did the chip, and in this case, we found actually something different. She did not have a piece missing. She had a piece that was there 2 times, and that's what we call education. And you can see it's very small. And we found that she had, using this comparative genomic visualization, which is the chip we use, that the patient identification of the region of the X chromosome that counts for a gene called in-finger transcription factor 673.674. So the reason I put this in here is that there's not only deletion in patients, it's not only the patients that are missing DNA that will have a problem. Some patients, if they have too much copies of the gene, that will be a problem as well. That's a new concept. We didn't always think that way. And transcription factor are things that will allow DNA to make RNA and then make protein. So this is, I've shown you something that regulates the transcription, and I'm showing you again something that does that. The point I want to make here is that that's a very common mechanism. So it's not only like things that you can see abnormal shape of cells and things like that, it's also how the cell works that is important. And by the way, those patients, their MRI is pretty benign. You will not be able to say that there's something wrong with it. And that's just a detail about it. Zinc integrated is just basically something that contains zinc that opens up the DNA and then allows it to be transcribed. So finally, I'll just go very quickly through some research models. So as usual, we start by human, and we observe our patients, and then we meaning like the scientific community, I guess, figure out that there's some problems. And so one problem that's very frequent, and that's the one I'm kind of biased towards, so that I know the most about, so I'll talk more about this one, is finding that the patient with intellectual disability had learning and memory problems. And this defect in learning memory is a core problem in intellectual disability. And it relates then, we can then relate to the model of learning memory to study intellectual disability. So I will, don't memorize that, please. It's going to hurt your brain. But this guy kind of was one of the pioneers in saying that, oh, maybe we could use animals to study things that happen in humans. That's all I want you to remember this. Okay? So in other words, you don't need to remember much. But the idea is that animal intelligence, that's the title of this book, is important to understand associative process in animals. So there you can see the idea of studying animals to learn about humans. That's the point I want to make with that. And then other people kind of built up on that and said that we could basically use association, again, to understand behavior better. Oh, I Okay, then Pavlov, a Russian scientist studying conditioning, studying GI systems, found that the conditioning of animals could be performed. And what he did is he took dogs, as you remember, and he took the dogs with a bell, and then he stopped with food at the same time, he stopped with the salivate, and then sometimes just hearing the bell would be enough to salivate. Okay? So there's multiple animal models that have been developed for learning memory, and they have been done in many little species. But all those models basically came to the idea, and you will not need, also need enough to remember all those genes. You don't need to remember all those genes. But just to say that the genes in yellow refer to genes that are actually involved in human patient with ID, but also found in the animal model of memory. And so you can see that there's yellow in every single part of this pathway. And there's actually more than that in real life. So the idea is that you could study memory, and you would find networks of genes that are also involved in intellectual disability. Because remember the fragile story, we need to find something, once we find the gene, we need to find something we can work on to figure out what's going on. And so that's the idea behind these things. So the first one was actually the human. Remember, I think Peter talked about HM, and the removal of this, a part of the temporal lobe, which contains the hippocampus, and his inability to learn things. So the case of HM underlies the importance of the hippocampus. Now, in patients with intellectual disability, many times there's problem with the way their hippocampus works. It's not that they have no hippocampus, but it's not functional. And so when we study animal models with the hippocampus, with mutation in the hippocampus, we will find that they have problem with learning as well. And touch also on the idea of the aphasia with this guy got the Nobel Prize for his work on learning and memory. So Eric Kandel basically studied a very simple reflex in motors and found that he was able to find which protein or which gene, I guess you could say, were involved in the steps that lead an animal to, when you touch a part of his body, to attract another part of his body. And the way he did that, and that's a very important point for you guys, is that, well, not for an exam, but just more as a scientist, is that he did that by finding the most simple model he could find to do that. He didn't start with like, oh, what's the psychoanalysis of this problem? He started with the most simple way to study that. And that's the success usually. Like the fragile guy went to what's the abnormal shape of this thing? Same idea here. And so Eric Kandel is like the founding father of, I would say, learning memory and understanding the gene. So anyway, lots of people now will study mouse and will study the hippocampus of the mouse because of HM, because this was important. One thing they'll do also sometimes is they'll teach a mouse to find its way to a platform, which is kind of alien because the solution is kind of missing. And with time, the mouse will learn how to get there. Now, last time, and you don't need to memorize these numbers, but last time I talked about the disease called neuroscience. Remember this patient that has the tumors in the brain? Those patients also have intellectual disability. Patients with tuberous sclerosis actually now have a treatment, at least experimental treatment, which is a drug that can reverse the memory defect at that time it was in the mouse, but now it's being tried in the human that have tuberous sclerosis. As I showed you, the drug is now approved for shrinking the tumor, but some people are studying, does it help the memory? And there's early indication that yes, it does. So it's moving quite quick also in the tuberous sclerosis. And this is all work that was done initially in mouse using these kind of paradigms that we don't have time to talk about all of them, but the maze is one of them. And as always, the fly has done some contribution to that. And that's using this kind of very simple test where we put flies in a tube, and then we give them an odor, and then we give them a foot shot. So if you watch, you'll see flies jumping. So this is a foot shot. You see the kind of jump. It's not because they shake, it's because they got a shot. And then they get an odor during that time. And then they get another odor, but this time it's just a cut that diffuses. And this time we don't give them a shot. And then the flies are resting for 45 seconds and then transferred. And this is Tim, my boss, sitting there, so this is Tim. And then he has them here. So we don't put one fly at a time, we use 100 flies. train once like that, and then you give them the choice between two orders, each one they got trained to. And you can see most flies will go to that side, just the side where they were not sharp at. So even after one thing, one fly like this is a fruit fly, will learn these kind of things. So learning memory is conserved across all species, and it's really impressive that animals can learn actually. These are very strong models because then we can make flies with mutation in Fragile X syndrome. And then we can study those flies. The reason we can do that, and this is an important point, not just for Fragile X syndrome, but for any type of animal research for mental observation, is that I think, flies, so mouse is even better in terms of conservation, but flies have 85% of the genes involved in neurological disorder. And in mouse, it's as much as that, even more. So although the animal looks very different, from the fly, actually, if you look at our genes, it's very similar. And that allows us to then do tests that will be better. And the brain shape has, and this is an important point as well. So those are very important points, this one and this one. Brain shape can be different and still show conservation and behavior. So the patient with Fragile X syndrome actually turns out have issues with learning and memory. And the flies have the issue of learning and memory as well. And we could go even further details with social interaction in flies versus in human with Fragile X syndrome that are very similar. So it's amazingly surprising, but it is very conserved even between two, like something very diverged like flies. And what you can do is take drugs that will, so we found flies with Fragile X that have memory problems, and I just said that. And when we put some type of drugs on those flies, we could rescue their memory. So the memory would go not completely to normal, but would go back up quite a bit. And now people in drug companies, and this has been shown now in cell culture from hippocampus, from human, and from mouse, sorry, not human, I think at this point. But it's now being shown also in mouse model that if you kind of interfere with this protein problem that we see in flies, if you do the same in mouse, we see the same kind of thing where the mouse can learn the maze better. So people are now trying to develop these things in drug companies to do that for human trial as well. To see if they will improve their memory as well. Okay, so summary. First thing we talked about was that there are several techniques. First, we start always with history and physical. We do IQ testing. We have teams that work with us. This is not one doc coming into a room. We need multiple people. Imaging is very important. CT and MRI will find this malformation in some application. And then, very, very important is genetic testing. The second part is that we talked about that there's different causes for intellectual disability. Brain malformation is one. Genetic causes, remember Down syndrome, the most common cause, Fragile X. And then there's new syndromes that we find using fancy genetic testing. And then the last part, I guess, is that there's several models that we can use to study intellectual disability based on their learning and memory defect. Human, amnesia, water maze in mouse, rat, and then fruit flies or other organisms. So if you have any questions, just email me like you did before, that's great. And I like the question, and if you want to know more about this,